Week 13, Overview, Aggression and Appeasement. This week we learn more about the sad events of the 1930s as we study several European and Asian tyrants. Full of a lust for power and national advancement, the leaders of at least 4 major countries sought to expand their boundaries at the expense of their neighbors. While America remained in an isolationist frame of mind, despite warnings from President Roosevelt of their need to bolster their military might, and while Western European democracies looked on with growing concern, the leaders of Germany, Russia, Spain, Italy, and Japan grew in power, developing totalitarian governments to such a degree that they controlled every aspect of their subjects' lives. There was case after case of aggression in the 1930s. Japan invaded Chinese Manchuria in 1931. Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935. German troops marched into the French Rhineland in 1936. General Francisco Franco began a civil war in Spain in 1936. Franco turned Spain into a right-wing dictatorship in 1939. Japan seized the main ports of China in 1937, brutalizing the Chinese who lived there. Germany demanded a union of Austria and Germany, in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles, and marched into and took over Austria in 1938. Germany demanded Western Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, in 1938, and took all of Czechoslovakia by 1939. In 1939, Hitler and Stalin signed a secret pact to invade Poland and divide it between Germany and Russia. Against this dark background, younger students will study the amazing exploits of pilot Amelia Earhart and enjoy the crooning of Bing Crosby. There are new inventions to learn about, too, as students continue their invention projects. Most students will also begin to read about the amazing story of the 10 Booms, a little family that lived in the Dutch city of Haarlem as the storm clouds of war gathered overhead. The biggest topic of the week is the growing power and aggressive stance of German dictator Adolf Hitler. Germany's Weimar Republic was set up with a parliamentary government after World War I ended. The Nazi Party won 38% of the seats at the legislature in 1932, more than any other party, but significantly less than a majority. President of Germany, 85-year-old Paul von Hindenburg, knew enough about Hitler's belief to be cautious about him, but he wasn't cautious enough. Hitler promised to renounce violence and follow the laws if Hindenburg would make him chancellor, Germany's equivalent of a prime minister. Hindenburg took a chance and made Hitler chancellor. There are only 3 Nazis in the 11-member cabinet, but they happened to be in charge of the police. Hindenburg signed an emergency order that gave Hitler the authority to prohibit public assemblies, outlaw newspapers, and arrest people on suspicion of treason without a warrant. The Nazis created a new auxiliary police force of brown-shirted stormtroopers. Then, little less than a month after Hitler took power, the building that housed the German legislature, the Reichstag, was burned down. The Nazis, who probably burned it, blamed the communists, and they demanded more emergency powers. Hindenburg signed another law that gave the Nazis virtually unlimited power. Just a few days later, Germany held yet another election. Since the Nazis had been able to shut down their political opponents, they hoped to win a clear majority this time, but they still fell a few seats short. That didn't stop Hitler. He refused to allow the communist delegates to take their seats, which reduced the number of legislators enough to give the Nazis control. The new majority passed a new law that gave the government unlimited powers. Within 3 months, Hitler had moved from being the leader of 38% of the elected delegates to absolute master of Germany. Upon gaining the power of dictatorial authority through the Enabling Act, Hitler quickly eradicated opposition to his program. He initiated a violent purge of all suspected challengers to his rule. In what was called the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler murdered many leaders and members of the Brown Shirts, the SA, the thugs who had helped to put him in power, because he feared their power would threaten his. He replaced the brown shirts with his specially chosen black shirts, the Schutzstaffeln, or SS. After outlawing all political parties except the Nazi Party, Hitler implemented the plan outlined in his book Mein Kampf. The Jews and other, quote, undesirables soon became objects of intense persecution. Hitler's propaganda regarding the superiority of the Aryan race and the corrupting influence of those considered subhuman, Jewish, blacks, gypsies, homosexuals, malformed, handicapped, led to events such as Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, where the Nazis destroyed Jewish synagogues, shops, offices, and they shipped thousands of Jews off to concentration camps. Hitler used the radio, cinema, newspapers, and magazines to spread his propaganda about the superiority of the Aryan race, the inferiority of the Jews and other people groups, and the glorious destiny of Germany. By furthering the idea that the Jews and others were the enemies of mankind, Germans began to blame these people for the problems in society. Hitler thus used racial hatred as a rallying cry for the German people. Hitler also used the schools and other organizations to achieve control. He knew that children's minds are easily influenced and impressed. Thus, his Hitler Youth organizations corrupted young minds regarding the evil of Jews, the glory of the Aryan race, the importance of supporting the army. Hitler sought to undermine parent-child relationships so that children would be loyal to him alone when they became adults. Each child became a Gestapo informer in the home. No parent felt safe undermining the rule of the Führer. Boys were taught to live and just as easily to die without thought, yet joyfully, for Hitler, who was portrayed as the embodied glory of the Third Reich. The world stood by and watched as Germany cracked down on gypsies, Jews, and other undesirables. Most Americans sympathized with the victims of Nazi Germany and were angry when they heard what Hitler was doing, but Americans weren't willing to do much about it. Americans had always tended to be isolationists, and with the Great Depression still lingering on, few people wanted to raise immigration quotas enough to welcome the people that Hitler was persecuting. Meanwhile, it wasn't enough for Hitler to purge Germany of its undesirables. He was intent on uniting all German-speaking peoples under his rule. The Treaty of Versailles had put a number of German-speaking regions under foreign control, but Hitler hated that treaty. He demanded that all German-speaking territories be united in his new Third Reich. He also insisted that it was wrong for Germany's military forces to be restricted any longer, and revealed that he had been secretly rebuilding them for years in direct defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler didn't just want to join all German territories into one new realm. He wanted to clear the people out of the neighboring lands to provide Lebensraum, living space, for his Aryans. He looked over the vast and fertile plains of Poland, just east of Germany, and imagined them filled with blond-haired, blue-eyed followers of the Führer. As the 30s wore on, Hitler grew ever bolder. He began to flex his new military muscles. Francisco Franco launched a right-wing revolution in Spain, and Hitler sent troops and arms to help him, in violation of yet another treaty. No one stopped him. Britain and France stood by. The divided League of Nations proved its uselessness. Emboldened, he sent troops to restore German authority in the heavily industrialized Rhineland, another violation of the Versailles agreements. Nobody stopped him. Nobody wanted another European war. With the Allies doing nothing, Hitler continued to call for a union of Germany and Austria, under his leadership, naturally. After intimidating the Austrian Prime Minister, Hitler sent his soldiers across the border. Austria fell to Hitler without a shot and with almost no protest. After all, they were German-speaking peoples. Hitler then decided to go even further. He began to demand Lebensraum in the Sudetenland, a part of the new state of Czechoslovakia that had been created after World War I, partially out of German lands. Hitler shouted that he would have it. He bullied, he screamed, he threatened, and in the end, he won. At a meeting in Munich, to which the leaders of Czechoslovakia were not even invited, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain gave his blessing to Hitler's occupation of the Sudetenland in exchange for a promise that here his demands would stop. Hitler promised, sent soldiers to the Sudetenland, and then set his gaze on the rest of Czechoslovakia and Poland, while the deceived Chamberlain returned to tell the British press that he had purchased peace in our time through his policies of appeasement. Hitler's ambitions were furthered by other extremist leaders. Benito Mussolini of Italy was a fascist, much like Hitler's Nazis. He had a much poorer country, but he had big ambitions. Generalissimo Francisco Franco wasn't a fascist, exactly. Unlike Hitler and Mussolini, who wanted to create a whole new kind of society in Germany and Italy, Franco wanted to take Spain back to its Catholic roots. Fascist or not, however, Franco launched a revolution in Spain and spent the next 4 years fighting a civil war with the help and support of Germany and Italy. Japan was another country with big ambitions. Unlike the European fascist states, Japan had no single dictator. Instead, a group of military leaders sought the greater glory of Japan through conquest. Joseph Stalin, who had weakened his own military by purging, that is, murdering, most of its leaders during the late 30s, signed a non-aggression pact of blood with Hitler, leaving Hitler free to attack the Western democracies, while Stalin had Germany's permission to take over half of Poland and to attack and occupy the small states that bordered the eastern shores of the Baltic Sea. The Allies warned Hitler that if he attacked Poland, they would defend it. Hitler seriously doubted their resolve, but it didn't matter. His men were ready. War was at hand, and he was eager to get it started. The 1930s was a time of trouble, economic distress, rising dictators, military adventures. Hard times put hard men in power. People around the world were in distress, and they cried out for answers. Men like Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco offered answers. "Give me power," they said, "and I will save you." They got the power they asked for, but they didn't save. There's a saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That saying doesn't apply to Hitler. Hitler had no power when he languished in a German jail writing Mein Kampf, yet he spelled out his principles and his plans in detail. Power didn't corrupt Hitler. Hitler was corrupt already. Does that seem judgmental? It isn't. Hitler was corrupt, and so am I. All humans are. Power doesn't corrupt, for God has all power, yet He's perfect. Power just removes the restraints that keep corrupt people like you and me from showing our true colors.